because of the fact that they didn't have the knife at trial, it became a non-aggravated life sentence for murder, which meant that I could accumulate my good time and the work time towards parole eligibility. Since it was non-aggravated, I actually became parole eligible in just 6 years.
Wow. 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 What happened to the knife?
It disappeared. Never to be seen again. It went to the sewer system in Dallas.
Wow. Hey, it's Lou Pimber. Welcome to Lou Pimber Speaks. A special guest today. We chatted with him in just a minute, but just remember, I am the author of the book Breaking Badly, a post-traumatic success story. I think we all have a book in us somewhere along the lines that why not write it? People want to hear your story, right? So enough of that. Listen, I have a very special guest today. His name is Brian Kelly. Very unique story. We'll have him introduce himself here in a minute, but I got to tell you, man, this is an interesting story. When I first heard about that, I was like, man, I got to hear more. I'm sure you'll be curious about some of the ins and outs of this whole process as well. So welcome, Brian Kelly, to the show. Brian, thanks so much for being here, sir.
Lou, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me on here, and I'm looking forward to it.
I know, Kelly. So you're out here in Texas, out here in Houston?
I am in Houston, been in Houston for, golly, 7, 8 years now.
And where were you before that?
Dallas. I've been in the Dallas area for quite some time. Actually grew up in the Kansas City area, and as I like to tell the Texans down here, I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as soon as I could.
I like that. I like that. I like that. So there's an interesting story behind you, man. Let's get right to it. So I heard that you ended up in prison for something, right? Can we talk about that for a minute? And but you've changed your life since then, and we're gonna get to that as well. You don't often hear these type of stories, So tell me, what's your origin story, Brian? I know you're from Dallas. What happened? What's going on?
Well, in 1992, I found myself standing in a Dallas courtroom. It seemed like the whole room, 50, 60 people were looking at me with hatred and condemnation. You could really hear a pin drop, and I just felt the oppressive judgment, be extended my way. And I stood there kind of trembling, and finally the judge broke silence, and he looked at me over his glasses, and he said, "Mr. Kelly, a jury of your peers has found you guilty of the crime of murder
Damn.
and sentenced you to life in the state penitentiary. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" And Lou, I would tell you, I stood there, I was just trembling, and I was grappling with anything I could share with the courtroom. And the only thing that really came to mind is, I agree with you. I am broken. I should be cast away. I should be punished severely. You're right. I don't even belong in society. And I was thinking about my upbringing and the things that led me astray. And I'll tell you, I was a pretty good student, pretty good kid. I wasn't even sure myself how I had ended up in such a dark abyss at
Yeah.
that moment. And so I realized my decisions, my actions, I had given away my right to even respond. So I stood there and I kept my mouth shut and was ready to take my medicine.
Wow. That's an interesting perspective, because what do you say to the judge? What do you say when that happens, right? You chose to remain silent, right? You chose to remain silent but at that moment, it sounds like elements of your life just kind of flashed before you, right? And so you were found guilty of murder in 1992. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, a couple of things led up to that, right? Tell us what led up to that. What led up to you being in that position to take someone's life?
Well, the short story is it was the fruit of my addiction. I had a cocaine addiction and many other addictions that I had spiraled out of control to where I'd lost my job. I was about to lose my apartment and I was driving a piece of junk car. Was losing girlfriends and relationships and friends and things were just falling apart. And in a desperate act, I took a ounce of cocaine from a friend of mine that ended up in an altercation, and I killed that man because that ounce of cocaine meant more to me than his life did. But, the bigger picture is, how did my road lead to such a nadir? And, I've thought a lot about that. And, I grew up in a small Kansas town. My dad abandoned my mom and me shortly after I was born. There was never a man who stepped up and really showed me what being an honorable man was. Addiction was prevalent in and around my home, dysfunction. And so there was a lot of things I saw and experienced that were troubling, but I'm not the only one who's ever had, difficult upbringing.
Right.
Um, I I did find out at an early age how much I loved alcohol, drugs. I felt like that, just catapulted me into a place where I felt better than I felt on the inside. I felt 10 foot tall and bulletproof when I was high, and so if that helped, I wanted more, and I was in love with a
Yeah.
monster called more, and really that just led me down a spiral. That would take me to the moment where I would take my friend's life.
So how old are you? You say your mom was an addict, you said, or is that incorrect?
Well, there was alcoholism and
Oh,
an
okay.
addiction throughout my family.
Okay, got it.
So I can't blame it on any one person. Even I was introduced to that environment, but as soon as I was old enough, I jumped right in with both feet. So I take full culpability for that.
Yeah, yeah. If so you how old were you when you first started drinking and using drugs?
Of my own volition, about 12. There were times in my family growing up that, I would be able to drink from the cup of the adults that are around me, but doing it with my friends, doing it of my own volition, that started at age 12.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And what was the reaction from your parents? Were they aware of it? They just kind of turned the other eye, the other
It
cheek, or what?
was it was normal. That was normal behavior for, our family, my extended family. Alcohol is just a big part of who we are and what we did.
And so fast forward from there, you're a teenager, you're a young man, and how did you get turned on to cocaine?
So my next step, was weed. That happened in probably early eighth grade, and I started discovering that all of these substances that everybody had been telling me were bad were really a lot of fun. And
Yeah.
so I was jumping into that. I was, when I would try one and I loved it and I liked it, and hey, we're going to move on to the next one. And so as things popped up, I was willing to blaze that trail. And as I was taking it, I was leading a lot of my friends along that trail with me. So I even had um, a principal one time that called me into the office and he said, "Brian, you're a leader in this school. You're just leading all your friends to all the wrong places."
Wow.
And, that conversation didn't go well, but I look back at it now and there was a lot of truth to that.
I was just going to ask you, man, have you reflected on that? And how does that sit with you now when he said that to you?
Yeah, if I could go back and do things differently, there's so many things. I see, you know, uh, too old, too quick, and now, looking back and if you had to do it all over again, gosh, it would be different, but we can't.
When you that day when you how long had you been using cocaine when back in by 1992? How long have you been
So,
using by that
you
point?
know, there for a period about 6 years, I had a roller coaster ride with cocaine. There was a time when I was really addicted and I was shooting cocaine, and I realized this is going to kill me. I
Yeah.
went on a 3-day binge shooting cocaine, and it was, I don't know how much time I had left, but I got scared. And so I quit altogether. And a few years and went by, and I found myself in Dallas and and I was partying with some SMU kids, and I was about that age. I was 21, and got turned back onto it through a girlfriend of mine, and started doing it. And we were just snorting, starting out, but of course partying all across the board and in
Right.
different directions. The more I leaned on that, the worse my relationships got, the worse they got, the more I leaned on Coke. And it became this, negative cycle that I chased, and kept thinking that cocaine was going to be the answer that would get me out. And it was just pulling me deeper and deeper.
So you were shooting it. So then, will you mix it? Will you speedball it, or how were you using it?
So early on, I was shooting it. I went away from that. I went back to snorting. And then somewhere along the lines, a friend introduced me to smoking cocaine, smoking crack, basically. And I thought, wow, that's a great alternative. I get roughly the same high as shooting it without the needle. I have found my answer. Oh boy, was I wrong there.
So you're smoking crack. Yeah, that's rough, man. So how old were you at that time? How old were you at the time?
I, let's see, I'd have been about 26, 27 when that was going on. I was sentenced when I was 28.
Um, that day when you took a man's life, and by the way, we're talking about this not to glorify what you did, or no way to glorify the use of drugs. We're talking about this because this is obviously a learning experience for many people, right? Especially for you, right? But also to bring awareness to that these things happen. But in no way are we having this conversation to in any way, amplify this act of killing someone, right? And I'm sure there's family of the deceased who, and what I believe you've spoken to them before, that this is all respectfully, it's a respectful conversation regarding that, but people need to know the facts, right? So what happened that day, Brian?
Yeah, I set up a meeting with my friend. I was completely out of money. Didn't have a job, but I wanted more cocaine, and I took a knife with me to that meeting. And when he pulled out the product, I pulled out the knife, and we ended up in this macabre dance of death, is what it ended up to be, and ended up stabbing and killing a guy that I knew and liked, just because my life had become so desperate for that product, that was all I could see. That was all I cared about, and I didn't really care about my life at that time. If I didn't care about my own, I didn't care about anybody else's, and so
Right.
I was just in a really dark, desperate state.
You were 20, roughly 28 at that time. And,
Yeah, I
and
was 26 when that happened.
so you went there like the intent to get this cocaine no matter what.
Well, yeah, I was going to get the coke no matter what, and it played out a lot worse than I wish it would have.
I was an undercover drug agent for many years. Okay. So I bought a lot of cocaine. I bought a lot of weed. I bought a lot of other stuff, guns and stuff like that. I know the dangers involved in these undercover buys, keys of cocaine, several 100 pounds of drugs and marijuana. I know the danger involved with that. So, um, man, were you under the influence when you did that?
I had been drinking that day. Yeah,
Got
so
it.
that was typical. That was my normal. I'm not sure looking back at those times when the only time I didn't have some sort of alcohol or chemical in me was right when I first woke up, and I went on in search of it as soon as I could.
And so there's a fight, and then obviously you had a knife, kind of had an upper hand, and you stabbed him multiple times, or just once.
Yeah, four major times and a couple superfluous ones.
So that day was just your whole life just changed at that point. What happened after that? Did you know he had deceased, that he was dead at that moment, or what happened?
Yeah, he slumped down the wall. We were both covered in blood, and he pretty quickly passed out. I stood up and I turned around, and we were in a bathroom that was next to an apartment complex swimming pool. as we got out of sight of anybody. And that's where we were doing the business at. And I stood up and there was a full length mirror. And I turned around and I was covered in this man's blood. And I stood there and I stared at myself and just absolutely despised the person that was looking back at me. And I remember just standing there registering everything that had just happened and realizing that I am a cancer on the face of society. I need removing. And that was one of those things I wanted to cry out to the jury when I stood in that courtroom. I'm like, you're right. I'm wrong. I'm dysfunctional. I agree with you. And but that's when that really came on. When I turned around, I looked in that mirror and saw who I had become. Um, I really, that was the first time in my life where I really started thinking about suicide. And for the next couple of months, before criminal justice system would come calling, I really was hatching a plan to end my life. And I never got to that point, never made it there. Maybe didn't have enough courage
Yeah,
to
yeah.
do that. I don't
How,
know.
that was my next question. How long did it take for them to arrest you?
It took about 3 months. So I was in Dallas at that time and kind of went in hiding or started hanging out in different spots, trying to keep away from it and hoping that, maybe this would just get looked over or they'd never find somebody. It turns out that I had some friends around me, some people that I was doing the drugs with who suspected that I had something to do with it and actually turned me into Crime Stoppers to collect their $1,000. And so I had actually moved back to Kansas, moved to my hometown. It was really, on my end, was intended to be kind of a farewell tour. I wanted to go see some of my family and friends one last time, and then I was going to ride off into the sunset, never be seen again. But before that happened, um, I was arrested on a fugitive warrant and brought back to Dallas.
Wow, 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 wow. Excuse me. So they picked you up. Was there a long trial in the process, or was it admission of guilt right away? Or how did that work out for you?
No, I went to trial. It took about a year. It took some while to get legal counsel set up. A
Yeah,
friend of the family actually bonded me out. I had a $25,000 bond, so I got out. I actually went
yeah,
back to Kansas, so I had some level of freedom. And there was thoughts of suicide during that time too. That I just, wouldn't be there to show up for trial. I actually had a friend that I knew from my drinking days, and who came up to me. He was in a motorcycle club, and he came up to me and he said, Brian, he said, I've read about the situation you're in, and it's a really tough situation. If you need it, I've got some friends in New Orleans in the French Quarter that you can go down to and get a new identity, but you can never come back. And I'm like, no, I don't think I'm going to need that. I'm lying to myself.
right,
This is going to work out well. And he
yeah,
said, well, just know that's an option for you.
right.
And so I, said, okay. And I filed that away. So when I finally ended up in trial, it was a 3-day trial in the Crowley Courts building in Dallas. And it just went horribly. I could tell, during the course of the trial that they had my bloody palm print at seething crime and a lot of other evidence to go with it. And all I had was me saying, no, it's not me. You got the wrong guy.
Oh,
And
you didn't admit it at first. You
no, I did not at all. I
deny,
said, yeah, you got the wrong one.
deny,
And
deny, deny.
when the jury went out, deny. When the jury went out for deliberation, I went out and I had my mother and a friend of mine with me, and I went out on the front steps and then I remembered what my friend said about getting a new identity, and so I was slowly walking to the parking garage with the intention of jumping in the car and taking off and going and finding those people. And I had my mom with me, my friend. I was trying to figure out a way to jettison them to make my getaway. And right at about the time we got close to the parking garage, my attorney came out the front door and said, "Come on, they're back." It hadn't been 30 or 45 minutes. And
Wow,
he told me, he said, if they take a long time, that's good. And they had just taken no time at all. And
wow,
so I met him about halfway to the door, to the front door of the courthouse, and I told my mom, my friend, hey, you guys go inside. I need to talk to my attorney a little bit. And so as soon as they were out of sight, I looked at my attorney and I said, I'm out of here. And I turned to go, and he reached out and he grabbed my shoulder, and I
Yeah.
knocked it off. And I looked at him, I said, now's not time to be the hero, bro.
Yeah.
And he looked at me, he said, Brian, you can't run now. If you run now, they're going to give you a life sentence. And I
Wow.
said, they're going to give me a life sentence anyway. He goes, you don't know that. I go, I do. I was in that courtroom. I know how this is going to play out. And then Lou, he said something that I firmly believe God put these words in his mouth because I think they're the only thing that would make me stay that day. He looked at me and he said, Brian, someday you're going to have to be a man and accept responsibility for your actions.
Wow.
And something about growing up without a father, it was a challenge to my manhood, and I'd been trying to prove that my whole life. And
Wow.
so when he said that, I'm like, all right, F it, let's go.
Wow.
And he's like, what? I'm like, come on, let's go. And I just started marching into the courtroom, running face first and to a life sentence that I deserved, if not more.
Wow. 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 Interesting perspective. It took that moment for you to realize that, you're 28.
You know, I've always looked back at that moment that that was my first step towards becoming a man. At that point, I was 26 years old and I've done myriad things,
Yeah.
but that was the moment when, even though I didn't want to, I began to start taking responsibility.
So they find you guilty. The judge tells you you are very much guilty as charged. And what was the sentence? Was the sentencing they took you to custody and then sentenced you later, or how did that work out?
Actually, there was about 45 minutes between my trial and sentencing. They just
Wow.
went ahead and did the sentencing and gave me a life sentence. And the next thing I know, I'm in a holding cell in Lou Sterrett in Dallas, and realizing that the rest of my life is going to be in a jail cell. That's all I can expect. And so while I was in the holding cell in the back, all I could think of was jumping up on top of this wall and trying to head dive down and somehow end this quickly. And again, I didn't have what it took to do that, I guess, or God wouldn't let me. I don't know.
Yeah. The what was life sentence though? What was it exactly? Because I know life sentence, some people, for those who don't know, life sentence isn't always your natural life. It's a period of a certain number of years. Sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 30 years, sometimes it's more than that. Or people get multiple life sentences, right? What was yours?
Right. And at that time, I didn't know the difference. I thought it was the rest of my natural life. I was going
Yeah.
to be in prison. That's all I knew.
Right.
I would find out later that at that time, Texas did not have life without parole. They had a life sentence, and it's calculated at 60 years. And because of the fact that they didn't have the knife at trial, it became a non-aggravated life sentence for murder, which meant that I could accumulate my good time and the work time towards parole eligibility. Since it was non-aggravated, I actually became parole eligible in just 6 years.
Wow. 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 What happened to the knife?
It disappeared. Never to be seen again. It went to the sewer system in Dallas.
So you knew that you'd have probably a window of 6 years to ask for parole. What was prison like when you first got there for you?
They sent me to the video unit in Palestine, which is one of the largest ones, and TDCJ. The inmate population was typically 18 to 21. I was 26, and they were referring to me as old school. What I found was a prison of about 3,300 men who were just like me. They were perverse caricatures of men who got what they wanted through threats and manipulation and violence. And
Yeah.
I realized I qualified to be there, but what what a disastrous place, or just the cloud of hopelessness is suffocating. We were fighting over benches, we were fighting over TV shows, we were fighting over who could fight who. It was just, anything was worth fighting over, and it was mob rule, strongest rule.
I was talking to an actor. His name is Danny Trejo. He plays Machete. He did a long time in prison back in the day. He says prison was like I think he was in San Quentin, I think. He goes, prison is like, he says, that you can actually feel the tension. He says, you can almost touch it and feel it. It's part of the air in the room, you know? Was that, could you attest to that?
Yeah, and in Texas, they've got what they call the check game or the heart check. And so as
Yeah.
soon as you hit your block that you're going to be staying on, you can go put your stuff up in your cell. But I was counseled by an old veteran from the prison to put your stuff up and you come back to the day room. You walk in, you go to the back, put your back against the wall, and the first person that comes up to you and talks, he said, you better just start fighting. And recognize that everybody in the day room is watching. They want to know if you're going to fight for yourself and
Mm,
for your stuff. And so everybody wants to know the pecking order. Everybody wants to know who the patsies are, who they can, who can they can target,
yeah.
who the predators can target. And so I went in and I followed, you know, the guidelines I was given, and I put my stuff in the house and I went back down to the day room, went to the back wall, and just was pumped up. And I started, pacing around, and it seemed like everybody ignored me. I found out later that I landed on a block, a prison block that was pretty cool. It was run by some older prisoners who wanted it to be, a little bit more mellow, and so we didn't have the check game, but I didn't know it.
Yeah.
And so,
You're ready.
I'm pacing back and forth for a few minutes and but nobody's approaching me. I'm like, okay, now I don't know what to do. So I kind of moseyed over and I was watching some guys playing dominoes and I was looking over their shoulder and this young stocky black kid comes up to me and he said, "Hey, Wood." And I had no idea what that meant. And
Who
I'm
would?
like, "What'd you say?" And he said, Relax, Wood. I see you're going to stay down." I had no idea what that meant. I thought he meant if I got hit and went down, I would stay down. I wouldn't get back up. And I reared back and I said, "I ain't going to stay down." And man, I'm just about to hit him. He goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, stop, stop." He said, "Dude, I'll talk to you later." He realized I was, all amped up on adrenaline and stuff. And so
Right.
later on, when I found out, that he was really paying me great respect, calling me a Wood, that they recognized a white guy who would fight,
Right.
and that I was, ready to go. And he was like, "That dude." But we laughed about that so many times after that day.
He was referring to Peckerwood, right?
Yeah,
Like
Peckerwood. Yeah.
like the white, kind of the white, I guess, gang or white affiliation in the prisons gangs. And so you did. So how did what was prison after that? How long did it take you to really assimilate to that life?
It took a while. I had been at the Beto unit maybe 2 months, and we had a riot on the rec
Mm,
yard, and I was out there, and that day it was the Mexicans against the whites.
mm,
And I don't even know why, but I was out there playing volleyball with some guys, and next thing I know, it was like 70 on 20, and I was a part of the 20. And so we're circled up, and it was just like moshing in a pit,
yeah.
and fighting in circles and fighting through a crowd, and it was crazy. And I ended up on the far end of the fence, and the guards shot a bunch of tear gas canisters in the yard, and so it broke up. Little posse of whites down on one end, and the Mexicans on one side, and the blacks on the other,
Yeah.
and the blacks probably numbered well over 100. And so, but right now it wasn't between us and them. And so, we got together and we were looking at each other, and there was, some cuts and some bloody noses and whatever, but nobody was really hurt. And so these youngsters that I'm in this posse with all just start screaming this defiant, "Yeah," and that brings them for a second wave. And so then we start fighting again,
Wow.
and and more tear gas canisters come, flum, 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 and that breaks us up again. And then same thing happens. We check with each other. Oh,
Yeah.
and so third wave, here they come. But this time the blacks are coming too
Hmm.
because they're eating all this tear gas for nothing. Now they're upset. So now there's a wave of about 200 people coming to kick the snot out of 21 of us.
Oh my
And I'm like, this is it. This is where it ends. And I've got my back against the chain wire, and all of a sudden tear gas canisters just come galore,
wow.
and the whole rec yard was on its hands and knees, hacking and coughing. And they finally gained control. They came in with a pepper fogger that they could spray the powdered pepper, and we were face down in fire ants and plastic handcuffs for about 2 hours.
Jeez.
Went on lockdown for 30 days, and it's just, and this was, one of my welcome to prison moments. These are the type of things I'm going to have to deal with for what I knew right then was the rest of my life. And I
Conflict
realized
resolution.
I deserve this or worse.
Right. You learn about conflict resolution and from a different perspective at that point. And so as you progress through your prison life, how did you evolve along the way? There's different phases to our lives, in anything that we do, right? You were there 22 years, man. How did you evolve? Do you feel did you go backwards for a minute and then go forward? Or how was that for you?
Very real sense that riot was a pivotal point for me. After we came off a lockdown, for some reason, I got a pretty good job in prison, and I was working in the officer's barbershop. And a friend of mine, another inmate, came and invited me to a prison ministry called Kairos.
Okay.
Kairos is a Greek term for God's special time or God's appointed time.
Mm,
And I'd never even heard of it. I said, Kairos, what's that? And he said, it's 4 days of home cooked meals. And I'm like, dude, sign me up. The food here is terrible. And he
right.
said, don't worry, I've got you. Matter of fact, I'm going to be your waiter. You're going to be disgustingly full every day.
Okay.
I'm like, sweet. So Kairos is 42 Christian men come into the prison for 4 days to meet with 42 hand selected inmates.
Mm,
And we have a series of talks and small group processing. We talk about choices and forgiveness and and father wounds and things like that, and really process deeply. And I'd never been around Christian men like that, and so I'm poking and prodding, asking questions, thinking, where do men like you come from? I've never seen men who love so well but have this quiet strength about them too. And I
right.
was just fascinated. And there was a man at my table in my small group who had went to Kansas University near where I grew up, and we talked for 2 days about KU, and he won my trust. He was a Lutheran preacher from San Angelo, and
Okay.
uh, and so being around those men of the light, I couldn't carry my darkness, my lie, anymore. And so
I see.
I pulled him aside and I said, Keith, I need to tell you something. And he said, sure, what is it? And I broke down and I just told him everything about my crime. And
Mm,
he listened to me so patiently. And he said, Brian, I am so honored that you would share that with me first. I get the gravity of that. Now I want to tell you something. I want you to listen to me. I forgive you.
mm,
Lou, I crumbled. Man, I was a big, snotty, heaving mess. And
yeah.
he let me kind of get it back together. And he said, Brian, although I forgive you, and that's true, you need to ask God to forgive you. And guess what? He will. And I shook my head. I said, Keith, I hear you, but I can't. I can't ask God that. And he said, why not? And I said, dude, I don't deserve forgiveness. I deserve this or worse. I'll take my medicine. And he got this smirk on his face and he even chuckled a little bit and goes, wow, I didn't realize when I came here this weekend that I was going to meet somebody that was smarter than God. And I said, well, hold on, dude. I didn't say that. He said,
Yeah.
you sure did. You admitted God would forgive you if you ask him. But of course, you know how to handle this better than he does. Guess what, Brian? You don't. And you're never going to have any joy, peace, hope, purpose, love until you let go and you give this to him. He
Mm,
knows it anyway. Why are you trying to hold on to it? And I said,
mm,
I don't know. And he said, Brian, how has your life been trying to do it your way? And I said, it's terrible. It's miserable. I don't know how to live. He goes, exactly. What do you have to lose? This? And so May 28th, 1994, not, not quite 2 years into my incarceration, I got down on my knees in that prison chapel And I just said, God, here's the broken pieces of my life. It's in shambles. You take it. I can't do anything with it. I want to be a part of the solution instead of part of the problem, but I don't know what that looks like. You're going to have to show me. And I found that he loves prayers like that, and he can take broken pieces and faster and foster a masterpiece.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the first time you ever had a conversation like that with another man?
Yeah.
You know,
And the first time I had a conversation like that with God.
let me put it from a different perspective. What do you say to the people who say, well, these guys go to prison and they always find God, and then that's just their way out? What do you say about that?
I've run into that thousands of times myself. Now that I'm in prison ministry and really have been in prison ministry since that day, and I think that there's a way to recognize those genuine moments or those genuine encounters with God, and they're usually pretty messy. And I've counseled many parents, many mamas who say, you know, my son's going to the chapel, my son's reading his Bible, and I said, well, you're going to notice a change in him if he gets completely honest with you in things that he doesn't have to tell you, but he knows he needs to own. That's the first thing that happened to me. As soon as I had that honest conversion and I found out that living with freedom of being honest was better than anything, I found freedom in prison with a life sentence.
Mm,
The first thing I did was started writing home and telling everybody, "Hey, I'm righteous in being in here. Not that I'm righteous. I'm in here correctly. I
right,
was guilty.
right.
You know, I don't worry about me being in here innocently. I'm not." And
So the test is when someone, they genuinely have repented and genuinely are accepting responsibility and are completely open and honest about
there's an ownership of past
ownership.
crimes. It's like, I love that ownership. It's like, hey, my life has been a wreck. I want to go look at that. I want to look at it honestly in the light, and I don't mind sharing that.
Got it. And so you get to year 21, and this is after you had already gone to the parole board several times. How many times had you gone by year 21 to the parole board?
I actually came up for parole 12 times, and I was denied each time.
Wow.
I was told that I was doing everything just right to keep it up, and then they would give me a denial. I had I had earned a bachelor's degree in psychology on the inside.
Wow.
I had went through recovery and all the 12 steps and then began sponsoring men. There was another inmate who stepped up and discipled me every day for 10 years straight. We lived together and we worked together, and every single day of our existence for 10 years would start out with the fundamentals of Christianity and how we were applying that or maybe failing to apply that sometimes in our lives. And so
Yeah.
I began to lead Bible studies in small groups, and I became a peer educator on the unit, teaching about prison rape elimination and sexually transmitted diseases and various things to help educate the prison population. It became prison ministry before I started shepherding the men around me,
Yeah.
and so finally at the point I came up for my 13th time, I had just cleared the 20-year mark, and I got to meet with a voting member, and he was telling me what parole was going to be like for me when I got out. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, this guy is telling me I just made parole.
Mm-hmm.
And when he got done talking, he looked at me and he said, Mr. Kelly, do you have any questions? And I said, yes, sir. I've got one. And I think he probably thought I was going to say, are you going to vote for me? And he said, what is it? And I said, will you give me parole next year? And he looked at me and cocked his head. He said, I don't understand. Are you
Yeah.
asking me to stay in prison for another year after doing 20? And I said, well, yes, sir. It sounds kind of crazy when you say it that way, but yeah. And he said, why? Why would you do that? And I said, I really want to go through this organization, the Prison Entrepreneurship Program, and develop a business plan that I've got and be connected to their amazing volunteers. But the only way I can do that is if you give me a hard release date for next year. Otherwise, I can't be housed on that unit.
Got it.
And Lou, he stared at me that for something I know it was 60 seconds without blinking. And
I
finally, he
would
just
too.
says, "Let me look into that." And
Wow.
and he gave me exactly what I asked for. I bargained for an extra year in prison to go through a program that I knew was going to be an investment in my future.
Wow. Wow. So, interesting. Interesting. You opted for more. Obviously, the program was good. Tell me about the program.
So, prison entrepreneurship program's about 20 years old now.
Yeah.
It was formed in 2004, and they use the vehicle of entrepreneurship to help reframe identity and hope for the future. You know, it's so difficult to get a job or gainful employment. Once you get out of prison that but a lot of the guys from their survival on the street have some entrepreneurial nature to them. If we could transform that hustle into a legitimate job so that they can create their own
Yeah.
position and or hire their brothers or sisters coming behind them, then we've turned the tables on that. And that's what we found. I would end up not only going through the prison entrepreneurship program itself, but when I got out, I went to their transitional house in Dallas, and they would offer me a job shortly after release, helping men just like me get on their feet. I did the case management piece of that, property management, kind of regional manager. And then I switched over to development and volunteer recruitment. And about 5 years into it, they offered me a CEO role. So I going back to my moment with that parole commissioner, you know, I bargained for an extra year to go through a program that I would end up leading. And
Wow.
Lou, I get called all over the country to go talk about prison reform and transformation through Christ and how
Yeah.
entrepreneurship. Got invited to the White House twice. I've been to
Wow.
golly, Atlanta, Notre Dame, Penn State, LA, Baltimore, just all over the place to go talk. It was like God gave me a platform to talk about the transformation that I had experienced myself.
So you get paroled out and you become part of this program. You had mentioned something that's interesting that I think we need to touch on a little bit. A lot of these guys come into prison with a certain set of skills on making profits and
Mhm.
losses. How did that relate? How does that relate in the entrepreneur world? In your from your point of view, what was that like?
Well, there are a lot of guys who are in a drug distribution ring of some sorts, large
Right.
or small.
Right.
And so they know a little bit about asset management. They know a little bit about management of people and risk management and different things like that. So they may not call it that, but that's really what they're doing. So a lot of those skills are applicable to people who are getting out. And so we wanted to really bolster those and help somebody prepare to either launch their own business or use those bolstered skill sets to go become an intrapreneur and go work for somebody else and be able to climb up the ladder and earn a livable wage.
Well, interesting. You you know, the process of when you came out, what is that process like for people when they come out and to assimilate back into the real world? What is that like for some of these guys?
Oh my gosh, that is so difficult. You know, after being in prison for 22 years, when I got out in 2014, think about this. I had never used a cell phone. I had never sent an email, never used the internet, never had a credit card or a debit card. All this technology was brand new to me. So my
Yeah.
learning curve and my acclimation back into freedom is just on so many levels overwhelming. Matter of fact, in PEP and the transitional house I was at, we have a case manager who typically has done some time as well, and he knows what I'm going through emotionally. He
Yeah.
picked me up and he was taking me to my first parole visit. And on the way to the parole office, he stopped to get gas and he was climbing out of the car. And I said, Hey, Gami, can I get out and pump gas with you? And he stopped and he looked at me and he goes, That's kind of weird, bro. And I said, I've never done the card swipe and the keypad. I don't know how to do it. Will you show me how
How
to do
does this
that?
work?
He's like, Yeah, come on, man. I got you.
Yeah. Wow. It's like you came in from another planet. You were
I've,
locked up.
I've shared with a lot of people that imagine if I dropped you off in Singapore today
Yeah.
with $50 and you
Yeah.
know nobody, could you make it?
Right. That'd be very, very, very challenging. So you were locked up from 92 to what year was that?
92 to 2014,
Wow. 2014. So
22
you've been
years.
out now 10, 11 years. Wow. Interesting, man. Those are some critical times too. Internet came out in 94, 95. So much has happened during that time. 9/11 had already occurred. Wars had already started. Interesting. Interesting. So you you say the guys come out, they have a tough time assimilating or, getting jobs and all that. Again, what do you say to that person that says, "Well, tough, dude. They did something. They deserve every bit of it." What do you say to that person? Or is there anything
Oh,
to
I
say?
completely agree. I want to own everything about my past. I want to own all my bad decisions, but I also want to own my future, right?
Okay.
And so I want
Okay.
to start making right decisions. I was serious when I prayed out to God and said, I want to be a part of the solution, not a part of the
Okay.
problem. Even if I never get out of prison, Lord, show me how to help these men around me. I want to make a difference. I don't want to die in prison or otherwise, knowing that my life has just been wasted. I'm starting late in life, but help me make something positive out of this. I don't know how to do it. You're going to have to show me. I think he loves prayers like that.
Wow. Wow. Interesting, man. And so you were with the PEP program, Prisoner Entrepreneurship Program, and I guess the goal of that program is to prevent recidivism, right? The people to
Mhm.
violate. Does that have a proven track record?
Oh yeah, we have. It's a nationally renowned program. It's probably the most renowned program in the country.
Okay.
For years, we had an 8% recidivism rate, 3-year recidivism rate. For the guys who went through and stayed in our transitional house, it was 4%. And if a man would stick around long enough to launch a business, it was 0. And so it's pretty amazing track record. They've had about 750 businesses starting by returning citizens, some of
Yeah.
which earn revenues in the millions and are doing exceptionally well, hiring the men coming behind them. And so it's a pretty big deal. And I've seen some amazing stories of transformation.
I always, when I was a kid, I've had family members in prison. I remember going to a prison in Mexico to visit someone as a kid, and I always wondered why do they feel sorry for these people? The word "pobrecito" would come up, like "pobrecito," he's in jail. All this stuff. I'm like, why? But I guess we're all God's children, right? And he picks us up right where he takes us just the way we come, so you found Christ in prison, and you stuck with the program, right? You became a believer, and you helped other people, change their lives. So that's definitely worth something for sure, man. Um, you were PEP, you became the CEO, and then where are you at now?
I left PEP a few years ago. The pastor at my church asked me to become the executive director of our community center that's connected to our church. And at that time, I was an elder at the church and a homeowner. I was getting married to a lady that I met at my church. And so, my life was had stabilized and it was I was doing well. So I took over that role as executive director of the community center for some time, and there was some changeover in leadership, and that didn't pan out well. So I came back to my first love, I guess you could say. I'm now with the Crosswalk Center as the director of outreach and engagement, and I'm doing a very similar reentry program, but this
Yeah.
is much more gospel forward, and we're
Okay.
all about discipleship, and so we're helping men and women get out of prison and get on their feet, yes, but to be impactful in the kingdom of God, to be disciples themselves and then disciple makers.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Now, what's the biggest message you tell these guys? What do you tell these guys? To
It's
together.
really about identity that when we were in prison, when we were jumping rope, smoking dope, and eating cantaloupe when we were whatever, your life looked like before. That was a false identity. That was an imitation that the
Yeah.
world or your wounds or your fear or the enemy had given us. You were not operating in who God created you to be. It's time for us to strip that off and find out what God created when He created you. He gave you skills, He gave you gifts, He has given you a calling, He's given you some people now who will help bolster that. And so I want you to find your true identity of what God intended when He made you. And it's amazing when they rise up into that and are surrounded by a thriving community that helps equip and empower and embolden them to see what all God has for them. And it's amazing. I get to see transformation stories all the time.
I love it, man. It is a tough sale, I think, for some people, when you say, "Hey, man, this guy's a different guy now. He loves Jesus now. He's a Christian now." When he killed some dude, 20 some odd years ago, right? It is a tough sale. I got to tell you, for some people. But if we believe like Jesus believes, he just picks up right where we leave off. And I personally am a believer that people deserve a second chance, right? But then from the victim side, he didn't get a second chance. And I know you recently had a conversation with survivors of this gentleman that you killed. Can you share a little bit about that? And
Sure. I've mentioned several times ownership, and I think we need to own. We being those of us who have committed felonies and crimes in the past, and especially those who have hurt people, we really need to own that. And we
yeah,
need to own that in the past, present, and future going forward. And part of that is making amends where we can. I'm a part of recovery, and that's a part of the 12 steps is making
yeah,
amends. And right.
yeah,
And how do you make amends for such a heinous crime like mine? Well, I think I need to do whatever I can. There's no way I can ever balance the scales because I took too much, but I should want to try. And
yeah,
so several years ago, when I was still in prison, I signed up for a program in Texas called the uh, Victim Offender Mediation Dialogue. And they try to bring together victims of violent crime with perpetrators of violent crime for healing.
yeah.
Or at least to get some answers. And so I signed up, but it's got to be victim driven. They're not going
Mm,
to reach out and say, "Hey, do you want to dive down into this one?" And
right.
nor should they. But I had signed up for that a few years ago. One of the daughters of the man that I killed reached out to me. She found me on social media and had some questions for me and started
Yeah,
asking me those kind of one-on-one through Messenger. And I'm like, look, I am willing to give you all of these answers that I can, but we can't do this alone. I'm afraid it's going to cause more harm, and I don't want to do that. I've
yeah,
hurt you guys enough. Can I bring in these professionals to help us do that? And she's like, absolutely. Can my sister come? I'm like, your whole family can come.
yeah,
But well, we just can't do this alone. So I invited my friends from the victim offender mediation into it. We did about a year's worth of preparation apart from each other to get ready for that day, finding out what their questions are. Do I have the answers? Is this going to be a healing process?
yeah.
And then we got together a few years ago for a 5.5 hour mediation that was easily the most difficult thing and probably the most rewarding thing that I've ever done.
Sometimes
But
your worst
sitting
day is
down
your best
across
day.
the table, yeah, sitting across the table, looking at the hurt and the anguish, the pain that I've caused in those two young ladies was just overwhelming, and getting to be able to own my past and share with them all the answers that they didn't have was an honor. Um, and so we went through that for about 5.5 hours, and I think it gave them at least, I don't know that they'll ever have closure, and I don't know that I'll ever fully understand how negatively I've impacted their lives, but at least I tried that day.
Yeah. Well, man. Well, Brian, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. Last question: what does the future hold for Brian Kelly?
I want to continue to be part of the solution, whether that's at Crosswalk or the kind of the personal ministry or the ministry I have through my church. I lead a recovery effort at my church, and I sponsor several guys, and I want to make a difference. I want to make, um, like I said earlier, I can't balance the scales, but I want to try. And so whatever I can do to try to help somebody, I'm willing. I told God a long time ago, my yes is on the table. And so that's just a big part of who I am and who I want to be. And so the more I can do that, I think the more I think it honors the lives that I have devastated so horribly that at least I'm trying to put some salve on a wound that will probably never heal.
All right. Well, guys, you guys heard it today from Brian Kelly, a redemption story, a reinvention story, ownership story. If you like what you heard today, like, subscribe, share. I think someone out there can hear and benefit from this story. And reach out to Brian Kelly. Where can they find you at, Brian?
A Crosswalk Center in Houston, Texas.
Crosswalk Center, Houston Center in Houston, Texas. So thank you all so much. Appreciate the follow, appreciate the subscribe. And Brian, may God continue to bless you, sir. We're going to be talking very soon.